In the middle of a bridge, a family records with a phone how a blonde woman runs among the cars before reaching the edge and moving to self-delete. Sometime later she wakes up in a hospital and refuses to answer the nurse's questions about her strange scars or her family, saying her name is the OA. The video of her on the bridge soon appears on YouTube and is seen by her adoptive parents Nancy and Abel, who immediately rush to the hospital. As they reunite with their daughter, they reveal her name is Prairie, that she's been missing for 7 years, and that she used to be blind. Something mysterious happened to cure her eyes. The family returns home where they are met by a giant crowd of locals and reporters excited to see the Michigan miracle. Prairie is scared and nervous, so the parents cover her with a blanket before leaving the car. The crowd calls her Prairie, causing her to remind herself that it's not her name. Later 2 FBI agents ask her how she got to the bridge, so Prairie explains she had been wandering around lost until a nice lady found her and took her to a shelter. However, Prairie left and tried to return to the place where she was held captive, only to discover the other captives were gone. The agents assume she means that she tried to self-delete to reunite with them, but Prairie denies this and gets too anxious to continue, so Nancy announces they're done for today. Later that night, Prairie tries using her computer but she doesn't have internet access. She begins searching the house for the password and finds a box filled with cutting objects, only to suddenly be interrupted by Nancy, who takes Prairie out for a walk to distract her. The next day Prairie finds a video recorder and begins recording messages to someone named Homer, explaining how weird she feels to be home and promising to look for him. Then she asks her mother about the internet password, but Nancy explains the doctors recommended she should stay away from the internet for now. Afterward Prairie sneaks out of the house and after crossing the woods, she finds an abandoned home where some students hang out. She asks Alfonso about Wi-Fi and he directs her upstairs, where she finds Steve and Jesse selling hormone medicine to Buck. As soon as Steve sees the camera in Prairie's hands, he freaks out and takes it away, not believing her when she says she isn't recording. Steve tells Prairie to leave and when she tries to take the camera back, he makes his dog attack her. Jesse records with his phone as the dog keeps biting Prairie, who struggles against the beast until she bites and hugs him to calm him down. Then Prairie takes her camera and leaves. The next day at school, Steve approaches a guy from the choir because the girl Steve likes is interested in him. Jealous, Steve punches him in the throat, hurting his trachea. Afterward Steve appears at Prairie's window asking for help. He brings a router to finally connect her computer to the internet and shows her the horrible things that happen in the behavioral military school, where his parents want to send him. Seeing this, Prairie agrees to help him with one condition. She needs 5 brave people in the abandoned house. Steve agrees and takes Prairie to the mall to buy some clothes so she can pretend to be his mom at the teacher conference. While Prairie changes, Steve catches a glimpse of her strange scars. Prairie attends the meeting with teacher Betty, saying she's Steve's stepmother. Betty wants to kick Steve out of the school, so Prairie reminds her that kids in trouble are actually the ones who need help from their teachers the most. Betty asks for her name, and Prairie says she's the OA. Afterward Prairie goes home and starts searching the web for her friend Homer. On YouTube, she learns that in 2007 Homer suffered a near-fatal accident during a football match that left him paralyzed and in a coma. Claiming he had a near-death experience and flatlined, Homer miraculously recovered. Prairie cries for him as she wonders where he is. Later at the supermarket, Betty runs into Steve's real parents and realizes she's been tricked. Soon Steve's parents drag him to Prairie's house, where Nancy and Abel try to defend their daughter because of their trauma. Steve also explains it was his idea, but Prairie hears all this and gets scared, so she records a video asking for help and uploads it to YouTube. After Steve's family leaves, Nancy and Abel take the camera away and remove Prairie's door to keep an eye on her. Later that night, Prairie sneaks out and hides in the abandoned house, where she's found by Steve, Jesse, Buck, Alfonso, and Betty. They all saw her video and want to help. To explain her goal, Prairie decides to share her story. Prairie was born as Nina in 1987 in Russia, but she wasn't born blind. Her father was a very wealthy man and her mother died in childbirth. Because her father was so rich, their family was always watched by the armed forces. As a child, Prairie was haunted by vivid dreams of being trapped in an aquarium-like cage, which made her nose bleed. To put an end to these dreams, her father dug an ice hole in a pond, making her float in the freezing waters to overcome her fear. This stopped the dreams, and for a few months she slept in peace. One day on the school bus, her nose started bleeding when suddenly the bus fell off a bridge because the armed forces shot the driver as a message to all the rich parents of the kids. The driver was already dead and at first the children were surviving in an air pocket, however one by one they started dying too. Desperate, Prairie swam out through a broken window, but she couldn't make it to the surface and died too. However, as her soul tried to move through a starfield, a guardian figure called Khatun reached for her with a warning. If she chose to live, she'd suffer greatly. Prairie chose to go back and woke up in her father's arms, only to discover she was blind. Afterward her dad decided to keep her survival a secret so the army wouldn't target her again, and Prairie was sent to a boarding school for the blind in the USA. One day her aunt came to the school with bad news. Her father died. Since her aunt didn't have much money, Prairie was taken out of school and had to live with her aunt in a house full of people who didn't know how to take care of the blind. The house was always filled with babies because the aunt ran a private adoption agency, and one day Nancy and Abel showed up looking for a baby. However, when they saw Prairie comforting a crying child, they decided to adopt her instead and changed her name to Prairie to protect her. Prairie's life with her new parents was happy and peaceful. One night, she started sleepwalking while talking in Russian, which then began happening every day. While moving, she would grab knives, so her parents had to hide them. Abel recorded the dreams so that he could show a doctor, who explained that Prairie believed her father was still alive and sent messages to her in dreams with his location. The doctor thought Prairie was showing early signs of serious mental illness and suggested some medicine. For 13 years Prairie took that medication, which numbed her but didn't stop the premonitions or the nosebleeds. Even when taking a simple bath, Prairie would relive the trauma of the accident. On her 21st birthday, she had a dream of climbing the Statue of Liberty and finding her dad with a birthday cake. Thinking that was another message, Prairie traveled to New York and waited all day near the statue, but her father never showed up. After a guard asked her to leave because they were closing, Prairie ended up in the subway and played her violin, hoping her father would follow the sound. Back to the present, the group realizes it's morning now so they must go home, but they agree to meet again. The next day at school, Alfonso receives pictures of a Russian accident from a number who refuses to share their identity. Afterward, a teacher informs him he's won a very important scholarship, and if he doesn't want to lose it, he must stay out of trouble. Meanwhile, Steve and Jesse are investigating Prairie's story, confirming they sent the text. The bus accident is real, but they can't find any evidence of Anina. Buck offers to help, but Alfonso wants no part of it. In the evening, the group gathers in the abandoned house again so Prairie continues her story. In the subway, she kept on playing her violin while ignoring her need to eat or sleep. One day a man called Hap found her and recognized her music as Russian. He also could tell she had a near-death experience or NDE. Hap took Prairie to dinner and explained he was an anesthesiologist. When one of his patients flatlined, he heard something whoosh out of their body then whoosh back in, and since then he was obsessed with figuring out where that something goes. He spent his life studying people who had NDS and thought Prairie should have never been medicated because it took away what made her special. He also shared a machine that allowed Prairie to hear the heartbeats in the room, including her own. Excited by the fact someone finally understood her, Prairie asked Hap to take her with him and study her as part of his research, so they flew in his private plane, which left no records. At Hap's house, Prairie tried to call her parents but they never picked up, implying the phone line was fake. Afterward, Hap took her to her new room in his basement lab, locking the door behind him when he left. Hearing this, Prairie worried and started touching her so-called room, only to discover she was in a small cell. The man in the cell next to her tried to calm her down with some words, and Prairie learned his name was Homer. In the present, Prairie has a breakdown at the memories and runs back to her house, where she lays in bed in the fetal position for the rest of the night. The next day at the mall, Nancy is harassed by a reporter called Patricia, who wants to write a book about Prairie's story. A furious Nancy immediately tells her off, and before leaving, Patricia gives her a copy of one of her books plus her business card. However, Nancy can't stop thinking about how sharing the story could potentially help Prairie move on, so she ends up inviting Patricia to dinner. Patricia mentions that she's worked with cases like Prairie's before and that finishing telling their stories gave the victims a sense of closure. Prairie gets upset because her story isn't over and runs away. In the evening, she meets with the group to continue her tale. After Hap captured her, Prairie stayed in that cell for 7 years. But back to the beginning, Hap used a hatch to give them food, which was just nutritional pellets. There was also a spring that flowed through all the cells so the prisoners could use it to drink and wash. They had no privacy from each other, and Prairie soon learned there were 3 more people besides her: Rachel, Homer, and Scott. Rachel cried for a friend who had been taken out for experiments and never returned. Prairie complained that she couldn't survive without sunlight and fresh air because of her blindness, so Hap agreed to bring her upstairs to stand in the doorway for a moment. After he closed the door, Prairie stepped back and touched the table, realizing she was in the kitchen. She immediately searched for tools and food and made a sandwich that Hap found delicious. She refused to eat the other half because the other prisoners wouldn't have that privilege, so Hap allowed Prairie to make sandwiches for everyone. This gave Homer an idea. He wanted Prairie to find a utility bill waiting to be mailed and Homer's football championship ring, which Hap took with all his things. They could put the ring in the bill with a note then put it back in the pile to be mailed, and hopefully whoever opened the bill would notify the police. At that moment Hap filled a cell with a sleeping gas, so Prairie learned he would put to sleep whoever he needed for his experiments. Back in the present, story time is over so everyone goes home. On the way out, Steve and Alfonso insult each other and end up in a fight. After some struggle, Alfonso proves that he's stronger and keeps Steve in a hold before letting him go. The next morning, Betty listens to phone messages before going to work. The new messages are about taking care of her brother's will. Then she listens to an old message from her brother over and over, just so she can hear his voice. When she gets into her classroom, someone has drawn a naughty picture of her on the whiteboard. Instead of erasing it, Betty draws a cube around it. In the evening, Prairie continues her story. With the excuse of needing the fresh air, Prairie eventually became Hap's housekeeper. He didn't take her seriously because she was blind, but Prairie learned a lot about him. Hap used sleeping medicine, so she would steal some whenever he couldn't see her and hide it in the pantry. When she had finally saved enough, she made a stew and put the medicine in it. Hap insisted she should have some too, so Prairie ate as little and as slowly as possible. Suddenly Hap had an allergic reaction to the tomatoes in the stew and collapsed, causing Prairie to consider letting him die. However, Hap pointed out that she didn't have the door codes and the others would starve. Then Prairie ran to get Hap's EpiPen from the bathroom, where she also found Homer's ring. When she accidentally dropped it, she reached down to grab it and found Rachel's dead friend in the tub. While Prairie took the ring from the water, Hap showed up and used the EpiPen before sending Prairie back to the basement. On her way out, Prairie found a bill and took it with her. The next morning while Hap was outside burying the body, Prairie passed the bill under the clear barrier between the cells so Homer could write the message. When Homer tried to pass the letter back, unfortunately the current grabbed it and washed it downstream. That night Prairie kept crying and couldn't sleep, so Homer guided her through some exercise to help her calm down. Then everyone bonded by sharing their NDE stories and Rachel sang for them. Sometime later while Prairie was with Hap near the stairs, she took the chance to shove him down. Then she grabbed a pan, broke the kitchen window, and ran away. She kept running until she came to the edge of a huge canyon, where the sound of wind helped her stop just in time. Suddenly she was hit in the head and she fell unconscious. Later Prairie woke up on a strange mossy plain. She couldn't feel pain but was able to see, which meant she was dead again. In a house nearby, Prairie found the same Starfield and Khatun waiting for her. Khatun explained that the prisoners would never be able to escape the basement before catching a little bird, offering it to Prairie. This bird represented a way to travel that was unknown to humans, which could help the prisoners to escape. However, it required a sacrifice. At that moment Prairie saw her father outside the window, but he couldn't hear her. Khatun made Prairie choose between eternity with her father or the knowledge to escape, so Prairie chose the escape method for the sake of the group. Then Khatun revealed her own wing and made Prairie swallow the bird, which was a seed of light. Suddenly Prairie woke up in Hap's house, where Hap told her she was dead for 7 minutes before giving her an injection to put her to sleep. The next time Prairie woke up she was back in the cell, making hand gestures in her dreams. She immediately told the others everything and they agreed they needed to figure out what Hap was doing during the experiments to take over them. She explained their NDS made them angels and revealed that her ultimate sacrifice gave her back her sight. In the present, Prairie's time is up for the night so everyone goes home. The next day Betty finally goes to the lawyer's office and learns that her brother left her everything, including a $50,000 life insurance policy. Meanwhile Prairie has a session with an FBI therapist. He's very patient and understanding, but Prairie doesn't think he'll believe her story. He can't help her if he doesn't understand the details, so Prairie leaves. In the evening the group gathers again to hear more of Prairie's story. After her second death, a week passed before they could make a proper plan. Hap took Prairie out of the cell to ask her questions about her recent NDE, using a heartbeat machine to be sure she wasn't lying. Prairie answered his questions in vague ways, managing to avoid mentioning Khatun while fooling the lie detector. Afterward the group discussed how one of them should stay awake during an experiment to learn more. Scott refused because he was already very sick, so Homer volunteered. The next time Homer's cell was filled with gas, Rachel and Prairie tried to suck it out, but they passed out too quickly and Homer fell asleep anyway. When Prairie woke up, she would do everything Scott said, making them realize the gas wasn't knocking them out, it was making them compliant. For the following year, the group kept practicing until they perfected a way to suck enough gas out of Homer's cell to keep him awake. Hap took him to another part of the lab and Homer did everything Hap asked, pretending to be under the effect of the gas. Then Homer was tied to a machine and his head was put in a cylinder that started to fill with water, causing his heart rate to rise in fear. Noticing this, Hap forced more gas into him. For the next 3 years, Homer kept trying to make it through the entire experiment awake, but it wasn't working. During one session, the other captives made lots of noise to cause Hap to go check on them, giving Homer the chance to search the control room. He played some recordings and learned that Hap worked with people who've survived NDS because they could be brought back during the experiment while people who hadn't already died stayed dead. This meant Hap was killing them over and over again then bringing them back to prove that death is not the end. Unfortunately Homer couldn't find out more because he had to run back to the machine before Hap could see him. More years passed with Homer never giving up trying to get through the entire experiment awake. Prairie told him that once he made it, if he saw anything that was alive, he should eat it. After tons of failed tries, Homer finally managed to stay awake while Hap killed him. He woke up inside a ceiling crawl space and started to move toward the light at the end. When he saw a spider he tried to catch it, only to fall through the ceiling tiles into a bathroom flooding from overflowing urinals. Suddenly he started hearing voices, so he grabbed a spare robe and ran away. After going down a hallway, he found a room with an aquarium, so he grabbed a fish and swallowed it. At that moment Hap brought him back and took him back to the cell. Later Homer told Prairie that he didn't feel any different. However, Prairie told him that the thing inside her was waiting for something, so Homer's thing must be waiting too. She also said that the thing called her with a name truer than Prairie, which sounded like away or oa. Then Homer fell asleep and started making gestures with his hands like the ones that Prairie learned from the bird. Later, Hap flew to Cuba and listened to Renata play guitar. After the performance, he approached her to chat and confirmed that she was an NDE survivor. Hap made his usual offer as he did with Prairie, but Renata turned him down. Meanwhile, Prairie and Homer were practicing their movements from cartoon. Rachel was still passed out from Hap's last experiment and wouldn't wake up even when Scott hit the cell walls with a bucket, making him think Hap may have made the gas stronger. When Hap came back, he noticed the captives doing those strange movements, but they refused to answer his questions, only saying they made the movements up. Suddenly Rachel went crazy and started asking for help because she saw on the security camera that the sheriff was approaching the house. Hap immediately played music to cover their screams and ran through the door to meet with the sheriff outside. The sheriff explained his wife had ALS and couldn't speak anymore, so he wanted to hear some hope from the doctor. Unfortunately, Hap told him that the disease was incurable, but he'd look into new research. Afterward, Hap kept watching the prisoners through the cameras and got jealous of how closer Homer and Prairie were becoming. In the present, Prairie runs out of time and everyone goes home. The next day, Alfonso has a wonderful scholarship dinner, impressing the VIPs. Then he goes to check on his mother and discovers she's been drinking and flirting with a married man. Alfonso tries to bring her back inside but only causes her to start yelling at him for ruining his life. At that moment, Buck finds them and helps Alfonso take his mom home before they leave together to meet Prairie. The story continues with Hap deciding he had to break up the power that the captives were developing. He didn't understand it, but he knew it was dangerous. The next time Homer woke up after being gassed, he was inside Hap's private plane on the way to Cuba. Hap told Homer that if he tried anything, the other captives would starve in the lab. Later at the hotel, Homer felt nervous and numb, but some pain helped him regain clarity. While Hap was distracted, Homer removed the hidden microphone from his clothes and ran to the reception to ask for help, but Hap had already warned them about his brain-damaged son. Homer ran outside, but unfortunately Hap caught up to him and brought him back to the hotel. In the evening, they watched Renata perform and Hap forced Homer to flirt with her to bring her to their room. While they did the dirty, Hap spied on them through the hidden microphones and played the sounds back in the prisoners' cells. However, Prairie was just happy to hear that Homer was alive and she was understanding of the situation. After years of imprisonment, it was natural for a man to be craving another person's touch. Afterward, Renata was locked up with the others. Suddenly the gas started coming out in Scott's cell, but the dispense broke and didn't throw enough, so Scott was still awake for the experiment. Since he was so sick, he knew he wouldn't survive this, so he tried to bribe Hap with information. However, Hap didn't believe the angel's story and put Scott inside the water cylinder. At that moment, Scott told him that Prairie could see, and Hap was so shocked that he forgot to reverse the process, causing Scott to die. Then Hap took Scott's bleeding body back to his cell and dropped him on the floor while blaming Prairie. After Hap left, Prairie and Homer began doing their cartoon movements, which were filled with more emotions than usual. In the morning, Scott's blood flowed back into his body and his injuries healed, allowing him to wake up. Laughing, Scott told the others that there were 5 movements and he learned the third. The 5 movements together could open a tunnel to another dimension of freedom. Hap saw this and was happy too, thinking his experiments were working. In the present, Prairie tells the others that she will teach them the 5 movements so they can open a portal to rescue her friends. Afterward, everyone goes home and Buck already starts practicing the movements in his room until it's time to meet again to continue the story. 2 more years passed with the group always practicing the movements in their cells. Eventually, Renata found the 4th one and her guardian told her that a potential side effect of dimensional travel is amnesia. The captives invented symbols to represent the movements, then Prairie and Homer added them to their skin. This explained Prairie's weird scars. She had the 1st and 3rd movements while Homer had the 2nd and 4th. Unfortunately, this meant Hap was also learning the movements, so whenever they finally got the 5th, they had to be bad fast enough to escape before Hap could catch up to them. A year after Renata had been given the 4th movement, Hap met with his mentor Leon, who was doing very similar experiments in the morgue of an abandoned hospital wing and didn't keep his subjects alive for long. Hap told Leon a bit about his group's movements but refused to share details for now, so Leon took out a gun to make him confess what he knew. When Hap refused, Leon shot near Hap's head, so Hap jumped on him to fight him for the gun. After some struggle, Leon grabbed Hap by the neck and tried to choke him, but Hap pushed him off and drowned him in a drawer full of liquid. Afterward, Hap left and told a nurse that there were people in danger in the old morgue. When Hap got home, he took Prairie to the machine and told her he wanted to run away with her to set up a clinic where they'd use the first 2 movements to heal wealthy people. Prairie asked what would happen to the other captives and Hap called them a detail he'd take care of, so Prairie turned down his offer. Then Prairie died again in the machine and emerged into the starfield, however Cartoon wasn't there. Before Prairie could search the area, she was brought back by the machine. Afterward, Hap played some sounds to her and she reacted to a recording of the rings of Saturn. Hap thought that was where they went in their NDEs. After taking Hap back to the cell, Hap listened in repeat to the sound of the rings and didn't hear the sheriff coming in. The sheriff saw the captives on the surveillance monitors and pulled out his gun, pointing it at Hap's head. In the present, it's time for everyone to go home. The next day the therapist tells Abel and Nancy it may be a good idea to medicate Prairie again, and when the parents refuse, he advises the family to do something they enjoy together. When the group meets again, Prairie coaches the others through practicing the movements. They all cooperate and practice with tough determination, wanting with all their hearts to get it right. Afterward, Steve goes home and his father is furious because a bill arrived with the expenses of the treatment for the choir boy. Steve has grown and is ready to take responsibility. However, 2 soldiers from the military school are waiting to drag him away. At that moment, Betty drives by Steve's house and sees the boy being taken away, so she follows the van while calling the principal to complain, accidentally mentioning the group's meetings. Night falls and the van eventually stops at a gas station, where the soldiers let Steve choose something. Betty uses the chance to approach him and shares her plan. When the soldiers take Steve away, he says he needs to pee, so a soldier takes him to the back. Betty comes closer and starts yelling, saying Steve was being molested by the soldiers. Unfortunately, nobody hears her and the soldiers get ready to go away, so Betty decides to use her brother's check to bribe the guys, convincing them to let Steve leave with her. Meanwhile, Prairie, Nancy, and Abel go out to dinner. They're having a nice time until a young woman comes over and takes a picture of herself with Prairie before they can stop her. The things she says about Prairie shatter the mood, and thinking about the town's crazy rumors upsets Nancy. Prairie decides to tell her a little of the story and mentions the movements, saying she's the original angel or OA. Nancy can't take it and slaps Prairie, which is seen by Alfonso because he's the waiter. Alfonso immediately takes Prairie away in his car and goes to the abandoned house. There they meet with Steve, who is so overwhelmed with fear that he accuses Prairie of using them as slaves. Prairie hugs him to calm him down and Steve stabs her leg with a pencil, but Prairie doesn't let go. Once Steve regains his sanity, Prairie shares the end of her story. When Hap felt the gun on his head, he immediately confessed everything and offered to use the captives to heal the sheriff's wife. At first the sheriff refused and arrested Hap, taking him away in his car. However, Hap's manipulative words eventually changed his mind and the sheriff turned the car around to pick up his wife. Later at the lab, Hap took Homer and Prairie upstairs while the sheriff kept everyone at gunpoint. Hap asked them to cure the sheriff's wife, then both men left to watch everything on the cameras. Homer wanted to let the woman die because it would make the sheriff mad enough to arrest Hap, but Prairie refused to pay for their escape with an innocent's life. As the duo started moving, the lights went out and suddenly the woman grabbed Prairie's hand to make a confession. She also had an NDE when she was a child and a vision told her that she would help 2 captive angels, so she had to stay alive until then. The vision also made her swallow a moth, and now that she could move again, she finally taught them the 5th and final movement. After she was done, the sheriff entered the room and hugged his wife, so Hap used the chance to shoot them both together. Then he pushed Prairie out and locked the room, leaving Homer with the bodies. Later Prairie woke up in the back of Hap's car, which eventually stopped near the woods. Hap threatened Prairie with a blade while explaining that he didn't need her anymore because Homer had all the movements and Hap himself could be the 5th person. Then he abandoned her there, and Prairie couldn't catch up to the car no matter how fast she ran. In the present, Prairie uses Buck's knife to cut her clothes as a symbol of her desperation back then. At that moment they're interrupted by the principal and everyone's families. Nancy immediately covers Prairie up and takes her away, seeing a police car passing by on their way out. Later Abel and Nancy go to the house where the other families are meeting, but they're kicked out. Suddenly Alfonso runs outside and tells them he believes Prairie's story, which he's determined to prove. Soon Prairie's house is surrounded by reporters again, so they have to escape and hide in a hotel for now. That night, Prairie finally shares the whole story with her parents. The next day Alfonso and Steve look online for proof that Prairie's story is real and find a video of her playing the violin in the subway. In the evening, Alfonso breaks into Prairie's house and in her room, he's devastated to find a box with books about angels, near-death experiences, the Odyssey, and the Russian oligarchs. Then Alfonso goes into the bathroom to splash water on his face and think, only to suddenly see Homer's face in the mirror. Upset, Alfonso takes the books and tries to leave, but he bumps into Prairie's therapist instead. The guy hugs Alfonso and says he and the group did well in helping Prairie through her trauma. Afterward Alfonso shows the others the box and they think Prairie made everything up by taking elements from each book, which disappoints them. Sometime later, Prairie is feeling better thanks to a new medicine and having a calm life with her parents in a new home. One day while taking a relaxing bath, she falls asleep and has another dream that makes her nose bleed. Finally understanding the meaning, she runs out of the house. In the school, Betty is fired from her job, and each kid hangs out with her old friends again instead of each other. Suddenly a shooter approaches the building and opens fire, causing everyone to run and hide in panic around the cafeteria. The principal tells Betty to leave with him, but Betty is worried about the kids and runs back to them. When the kids see Betty arrive, they all share a look and nod with a plan in mind. They come out and start performing the 5 moments together, confusing the shooter and causing him to freeze. A cafeteria worker uses the chance to jump on the shooter and causes the gun to accidentally fire, causing a bullet to go through the window and reach Prairie, who has been outside moving along the group. Soon an ambulance takes Prairie away and the group tries running after it to no avail. Darkness takes over Prairie and her voice suddenly whispers Homer's name. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.